Hello, everyone, and welcome to Pixels and Profits. We are back with the Pixel Brothers. In this episode, we're going to be focusing on our outlook and predictions for 2025. Ahead of that, we will probably just do a really quick recap also on 2024. And so I think we could just go ahead and get started. So maybe starting with 2024, although we will spend most of our time on 25, but in terms of, I don't know, events, lessons, companies, what do you guys have? Well, what are your takeaways from 24?
Yeah, I'll start on a weird note. I would just say that this year for me was just more facts based about us being in a mild gaming recession. So, if I squeeze back, I've been covering gaming pretty intensely for a little over 10 years. And back then, like gaming from an investor perspective was just in a much different place. Major US publishers traded at drastic discounts to B2B and B2C software peers, more in line with consumer goods like toys. And NVIDIA made GPUs and had a $10 billion market cap. Fast forward to 21 and 22, it was a much different story, right? Like Fortnite was in full swing. We had high profile IPOs of things like Unity and Roblox. Activision was acquired for 70 billion. A lot of mobile publishers were taken off the table. And compounding on that, we had a lot of VC capital pouring into new game development at a record pace. So this was like peak gaming euphoria, and in my opinion, ultimately the end of a cycle. But I think folks that have been in the gaming industry for over 10 years have a different view on the last couple of years of downturn because they've seen it before largely. This industry is cyclical. There's no other way around it. So yeah, I think we've been in a recession for about 2.5 years, and that's noted by mass industry layoffs, studio closures, and new games falling flat in their face. But from a more positive lens, I don't think the last 10 years were a waste by any stretch. I mean, there's a huge difference in where gaming sits from an investor perspective, largely due to gaming's overall impact on culture, and valuations and fundamentals have inflected and held materially. And I do think that we're near a turning point. So that would be my first takeaway for 24.
I would just add on the topic of the recession. Economists like to they like to describe recessions with letters, the shape of the recession. Is it a V shape and we bounce back quickly, right? We go down and we go up. Is it a W shape? We go down, we go up, we go down, we go up. Or is it a U shape and we kind of drag along the bottom? And I feel like we're dragging along the bottom. I feel like it's not getting worse, but it's not getting better, right? Layoffs have mostly, well, you could say they slowed. There's been some high profile. AppLovin did a big, round of layoffs at it just recently, but those feel more product specific than just like we need to cut 20% across the board layoffs. I think we're past that point at this point, and we're at the point of more, project fails, okay, people lose their jobs, but like that's kind of the state of where it was before 2020, right? That happened. And I think that, when we look at things like that, we look at, even though I know you guys want to talk about new releases, there have been successful new releases, sporadically. Brian, you were just saying you were playing Marvel Rivals for a little bit, right? There's been some successes recently. I think there's positive signs, as you're saying. It's just, when does the bottom start to inflect upwards? I think that's a loser's betting game.
Right. And one of the things for me with respect to 24, you mentioned new releases, and it's really about how do new games get attention? And so, it's been mentioned before. And one of the things when we saw Netflix's interest in gaming, it came from when they noticed that Fortnite was taking time away from Netflix, right? And so I think we're seeing the impact of ongoing live operated games crowding out the ability for new games to gain as much traction as we would hope for. So we've seen a number of high profile failures in the market, and some pretty hyped up games, whether it's Spectre, Supervive, Multiverses, Deadlock, and others, are now fighting for attention. And I think very recently it's become popularized about Valve's recent year in review for Steam. Some of the statistics came out that only 15% of Steam players spent their time on games released in 2024, relative to, for example, the past 1 through 7 years, where 47% of players played games there and 37% played titles from 8 or more years ago. So we're really seeing this challenge of new games to be able to gain attention. And so I think that's going to have a pretty dramatic impact on the market. And clearly, what we've seen is that when it comes to skill set, it's not like the guys that create more premium game products or, kind of like, non-live operated game products are able to transition well into creating live operated games. So we'll see that story continue to play out, I think, in the future. But for me, that was like a big thing that became pretty obvious in 24.
Yeah, I've kind of gone back and forth myself on this one, wondering if some of these headlines around time spent in older games is more a byproduct of us being in that bottom part of the recovery curve and just piling on. But I mean, the statistics are pretty stark and shocking, frankly. And I think it's just a product of having so many games in the market, from a 5 to 7 year time frame that have focused on live operations, have focused on player retention and content, that eventually you kind of run out of things to play.
Yeah, I mean it's weird because you see some of these old games, and my kids are going from Valorant back to Fortnite back to some. It's hard to like compete against some of these games that are that have such a strong core loop. And when there continues to be changes, and I think live ops has actually become more sophisticated for a lot of these game development studios, and so they've been doing a better job as well.
I've also personally like kind of developed a mental model. We tend to lump every live ops game together. Fortnite's very different from Overwatch, right? The social dynamics, the demographics, the time spent, etc. We have to start think. I think we have to start thinking about these in terms of which of these are quasi social platforms. GTA Online, right? No one's going to usurp GTA Online anytime soon because it's more than just a game. I watch these stupid TikToks. This guy, Samurai, he rides a motorcycle and kicks the NPC cars, and then they chase him, and then he tries to get them to crash and wreck themselves. And it's just stupid, but it's like hilarious. But that doesn't exist in a game like Overwatch, right? So there's so much more to a lot of these games that if you're trying to compete with them for time, you're going to fail. That's not something you can compete with just by creating a better game loop.
I mean, you're also competing against a demonstrative amount of spend, right? Like how many people have spent more than $200, $300 in Fortnite in any given year? And if you change games, you lose that library of content that you like to flex with or whatever. So it's
But
a
blockchain
tough
fixes
battle
that.
for sure. Stop it. What about China, Joe?
Oh yeah, so yeah, I think the other thing that we saw in 24, rise of China from Black Myth Wukong to Genshin Impact, Zenless Zone Zero, and many others. We also, on the mobile side, we saw that when you look at the top 10 games worldwide, half were from China. Honor of Kings, PUBG Mobile, Last War Survival, Whiteout Survival, and Dungeon Fighter Origins. And in addition to mobile, we're starting to see a shift to HD games from China. And it's not just Wukong, it's games like Delta Force that recently launched, and there's more on the way, like Wu Chang, Fallen Feathers, Ananta, Honor of Kings World, Arknights, Enfield, Where Winds Meet. And there's just a bunch more on the way, as I think that China is starting to become a lot more expert in terms of having the capability of delivering very high end experiences and also and creating AAA games. And one can argue creating these games better than the West at this point.
Yeah, I have to agree on China being a material takeaway for 24. I think some of the success factors are what we've talked about in the past, like lower costs or more intense development cycles. But I also think it speaks to investment duration on behalf of Chinese publishers, right? It's a natural reaction for U.S. companies to pull back on investment and staffing when times get tough, like when monetization and engagement trends rolled after the lockdown lifts. And this is all fine and good, but investors have largely looked past lackluster top-line growth for names like EA and Take-Two and Activision if it were still public. But the other part of this is like while U.S. publishers have largely done a good job at playing defense, they're also not playing offense, whether that be through developing those billion-dollar franchises or acquiring them. So naturally, it gives the opportunity to those who have the stomach to invest in downturns. And we've been talking about China for a while. I think I saw a lot of competition in my mobile experience at Glue, like in the 2017, 2018 timeframe. And I think we always just kind of guessed that it would just coalesce there and stay there because HD was so hard. But, we're kind of seeing the fruits of that labor over the past, call it 4 to 5 years. It takes a while for games to be made. And now we're kind of seeing those impacts a lot more in our face.
I would also just add that none of this is by accident. A lot of people who don't pay attention to China have never spent material amount of time in or around China or in Asia in general, probably see these games coming from China and they're like, where did this come from? But if you go back to 2021 when they had the big gaming crackdown domestically, every major gaming company in China shifted their strategy to growth in the West. To take an analogy, alliteration from Chinese folklore, it was a journey to the West, right? And that's exactly what they've done. And so this was not by accident. This is years in the making. We're 3 years into a strategic initiative to grow outside of China, especially in the West on HD, console and PC especially. And we're seeing it take fruit this year. 3-year dev cycle, that checks out, right? So, it's been a couple of years in the making, but it's by no means an accident. And there's so many reasons that China can compete much more better than Western developers can, both from internal politics and internal studio structure, but also from a cost perspective.
Also incentives. I think they do a much
Yeah,
better job on incentives in China. I've
everything.
got one more takeaway from 24, but do you guys have any others?
One, I would say that I think 24 was an interesting year for to generate some excitement over potential new platforms. There's a handful of mega cap companies that have similarly continued to invest during the gaming recession, so to speak, whether that be Apple or Meta or Nintendo on a smaller scale. So I think there's a lot to be said where we are for the consumer adoption arc for things like virtual reality or mixed reality. And there's two major blockers, right? The first is the chicken and the egg conundrum on hardware versus software. And the other would be the financial viability for VR and MR studios to take a chance on an ecosystem with a fraction of user base of console, PC, and ultimately mobile. But the fact is that computing platforms, any new computing platform, will need games to succeed. And I think that last part is the most exciting for me. When does it become financially viable for developers to go outside of their comfort zone and try something new?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I think is that I'll just say here is, name me a successful gaming platform that existed without first party content. Even Steam has, Valve has first party content, right? Apple doesn't have first party content and they don't seem to want to. Meta doesn't have first party content, doesn't seem to want to. So, I don't know, maybe they can break the mold and they can be a platform without developing content, but history shows that doesn't work. And I'm curious if that changes.
Right. For me, my last sort of 24 takeaway is basically that people have rediscovered that live ops matters. And I think for a time, live ops was seen as a bit of kind of like a sleepy, you just turn the crank, and for forever franchise types of games, it wasn't really thought that you could achieve too much or gain significant alpha or generate a big outcome and then enter Brawl Stars, right? And so one of the crazy outcomes in 24 was just a ridiculous turnaround that the two Franks at Supercell led in terms of the performance of Brawl Stars, which dramatically increased revenue, I think by over 6x or something like that. And when we look on the HD side, we see some titles, for example, comparing PUBG Battlegrounds and Apex Legends. Hat tip to Mitch Zamara for pointing this out for us. But one is growing and the other is declining. And so I think there's a little bit of a kind of reevaluation in terms of how important a good live ops team is and just what kind of impact a good live ops team can have on the success of a product. And so I do think that more companies are going to be reevaluating how the teams and not just looking at these games as, okay, this game is kind of declining. We're just going to ship it over to India or wherever and just operate for cost. I think there may be a greater emphasis on really trying to understand whether the right teams are behind these games and having more aggressive targets in terms of trying to turn some of these games around.
Yeah, I think the hardest thing to do in game development is to build an audience and a strong base of DAO and MAO. And if those aren't being monetized appropriately, of course, the team behind it is of utmost concern. But if you have something like that that's under leveraged, that's largely what the large publishers have been doing for the past 3 years, is figuring out ways to make the audience they do have captive monetize, or and also not just like spend more money, but also perform for the game so that they do have something to spend money on and enjoy spending money on.
Right. And on the mobile side, there's actually App Store algorithmic benefits from having a game that's been live operated for a time. And certainly, if
That's interesting.
I mentioned some of the Steam statistics, but it seems like a lot of the PC gamers are sitting in old games as well, anyway. So something to think about. And so maybe in terms of wrapping up 24,
I
it just
had, I'm sorry,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I had one more for 24,
Okay. Okay.
just from my time in UGC land. And it's that, at least from an investment and a profit share perspective, um, you know, especially venture backed, you know, studios in UGC space, basically no one's hit escape velocity yet. And we're a couple years into the significant boom of these platforms, Roblox and now UEFN. Some of these studios, you know, GameFam, et cetera, are, you know, seeing great vanity metrics, user growth, engagement, but monetization is elusive for a lot of these businesses, and no one's hitting escape velocity on the financials that matter. And I'm curious if that happens, when, or if it even does, or if we have the wrong mental model about, you know, Roblox and Epic are going to continue to take the lion's share of profit in this space, which they have been for a long time. And I'm curious if anyone really hits escape velocity and sees economics akin to mobile games, because right now economics look more like, you know, what we're seeing. They're honest, not even like traditional games. They're more like marketing, branded, branding economics. You're kind of just getting, either paid for work for hire or some sort of, modest revenue share. But the spending capacity of the user base, especially when you're dealing with these venture-backed studios and what they're developing, these aren't, always going to be, native platform games. They're made by marketing execs. And so it hasn't hit escape velocity yet. And I don't know when that's going to happen.
Yeah, and if we were to like roll back the clock to 23, looking into 24, I do think that was like a major thesis or potential growth story was around a lot of bigger opportunities around UGC. And to your point, it just hasn't panned out. And so that was a little bit of a underwhelming outcome for UGC platforms and companies that are basically staking their business around some type of UGC business. But
Yeah, I mean,
hopefully we'll
myself
see some things.
included, like a lot of people thought this year was going to be like 2013 for mobile,
Right.
where we'd really start to see that inflection. And I just don't think it happened for a lot of reasons. But, I think part of it is just the how the users spend time. You look at the Roblox reported statistics, everyone spends 2.5 hours a day, but look at the average session length in any individual game, it's 7 minutes.
Right.
And that's good. That's like a good session length is 7 minutes. So
All right. So just speaking about public gaming companies and more specifically winners and losers, I can start with my take. And I think it's kind of obvious that AppLovin has really just been killing it. And they kind of really just kind of broke loose in 2024, executing incredibly well. And these guys really know how to win. They are known in the industry as the most ruthless and aggressive in a good way company.
maybe to put into this, you can have
Sure.
AI take the McDonald's, I'm loving it, and you can have them go ba da ba ba ba, I'm app loving it, after this year for them. Sorry, that's my really bad dad joke of the day.
You're
Yeah.
cut off. Yeah.
They're winning a lot. There's probably, I do actually want to record a podcast at some point that speaks to the market share that they're taking, at least on the ad side from Unity. I think there's a lot of nuance there that I think it'd be interesting for our audience to know more about. But certainly, I would say from an execution and performance perspective, AppLovin I felt was like the big winner in 24. And for losers, what I would say for me, and again, Matthew, a long while back, I published that post based upon your recommendation about examining bookings to employees, and we saw that Ubisoft was one of the most inefficient companies in the games industry. I gotta say, Ubisoft is probably the big loser of 24. I feel like we are witnessing the end of an era in terms of these big, slow, inefficient, monolithic game studios and how they operate. I think a new model must emerge. And I think 2024 was the year where it just became painfully obvious. And I do think next year is a year where newer models may become more obvious in terms of a path forward for a more viable type of model. And I mean, I think the big monolithic game studios still can work, but if it does, it's probably going to be out of China. So those are some of my thoughts. I don't know what you guys think, and what do you guys think? Who would you say are big winners and losers in 24?
Yeah, it's insane for me to refute App as a top pick. I mean, just stellar execution and kind of reaping those rewards from their software business relating to a software multiple, something that we highlighted a few times over the course of the year. I would take Roblox as a solid number two. Stock is up only 30% this year, but it's a solid double from early May after they took a beating on a weak quarter. But since then, they've really accelerated and outperformed for the remainder of the year. Like going public is a tough job, and I think we're now like 2.5-ish years from their IPO, and sometimes it takes a little bit of a resettlement, but for a management team to dig down and reset expectations and then outperform those for the second half of the year was pretty commendable and not easy to do. Losers, Ubisoft for sure. I mean, there was a point in time where we've done, I think, probably 2 or 3 near full shows on Ubisoft. Almost never positive, and it was almost to the point where we were like, should we even bother talking about them anymore? I think for that Embracer episode, because they've just fallen so far from grace. It's unfortunate, but I hope it does turn around. My number 2 would be Unity. The stock lost almost 70% of its market cap through the first half of the year. This obviously goes hand in hand with hiring Bromberg mid-year, and the stock has responded well thus far. That was enough for me to at least take a closer look and turn the corner on that name, but for sure, for the first half of the year, a huge loser.
Well, I'll just be different for the sake of being different and won't repeat the same answers. So, if I take away the ones that you guys called out, Embracer has to be on the list of winners, right? I mean, the stock has doubled since they sold Gearbox and announced the split plan. It's still way down from where it was, 2021, 22, but I mean, give them credit for making very, very difficult decisions and, having a come to Jesus moment and finding a path forwards that's going to be financially viable. Looking ahead, I mean, I don't want to preview what we're going to talk about, but I don't know if it's over. I mean, the spinoff of Asmodee is going well. They just raised the debt financing, and I got to go back and check. I think it was oversubscribed significantly. So it's clear that that's going to work out. And then they're going to spin off the coffee stain business and be left with a really nice IP business sometime next year. So, then we go back to what we talked about, that, hey, is this a takeover candidate with all the IP they have once it's kind of, cut down to the brass tacks. So I think Embracer's a winner for sure. On the loser side, I'll just add one more to the list. Microsoft's a loser. I mean, you spent $69 billion on Activision to put Call of Duty in Game Pass and drive significant Game Pass growth. And all the indicators point to zero growth in Call of Duty on Xbox. And if Game Pass subs were growing 50%, they sure as shit would be telling us that. But you go through the financials, there's no mention of Game Pass subs. They used to highlight it when it was growing 5 million year over year. Now it's not growing. And so it's clear that hasn't worked. And, we'll see what happens as the business continues to go. And if you're Microsoft, it doesn't really move the needle for them. So they kind of probably don't care. But from a gaming industry perspective, it's clear that hasn't worked.
Yeah, I think that deal specifically was kind of a loss for gaming in general. And it's probably about as deep as I'll go into it for now. And I like your call out for Embracer for sure. After the last episode we did on them, things didn't look great, but we did take a quick look at how those things were repackaged. And I would say that'd be a good lesson learned for Ubisoft. Maybe pay attention to what they did and understand the position that they're in and really make some decisions that might be tough, but it really sets them up for long-term success.
Although, if I'm correct, I think JK said he wouldn't buy the stock there when they did the split. So,
well, it sounds like you're long. So, nice call.
I only try to own like 4 or 5 stocks.
Oh, we know. Yeah.
All right. So I think with that, maybe we can roll into 2025 predictions. I've got, let's see, how many do I think I've got 5. I don't know how many you guys have, but who wants to start?
I
I
got
have
five.
threes,
I got
so
five also. But I think JK, why don't you start? Because
underperforming.
you kind of alluded to your first one in kind of your
Yeah,
answer there for
yeah,
24. So why don't you kick off there?
yeah. Okay, cool. So the first prediction I have is something that I'm just calling the new game development model. And when you look at like um, the way that Western game development, at least at the bigger studios, has worked, which is basically a top-down kind of monolithic game development process, it seems like this isn't working. And so we've had some pretty high-profile failures, whether it's like Concord or Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League. But at the same time, we've seen the rise of China and Chinese gaming, as we talked about, beginning to dominate the market. In 2015, China started to increasingly develop mobile game capabilities until it became dominant. And now in the 2020s, we're seeing China take over not just mobile, but starting with also in the HD market with games like Genshin Impact, Black Myth Wukong. More recent titles, we mentioned some of these Marvel Rivals, Delta Force. And so I just think that we've got to like reevaluate how this kind of game development is operating, the costs associated with it, and whether it actually makes sense, right? So I think like if we were to think about, mentioned Activision, but there was also, I remember seeing some posts on LinkedIn about, trying to build a Warcraft 4 or a new StarCraft at Activision and just how expensive that would be. And so I think like some of these products make sense, but they just can't be developed with the current kind of model that we have. And so I think with what's happening today, with potentially lower cost structures out of China and their work ethic, as well as AI and things like that, we're going to start to see what I call kind of large vector to small vector development. And what I mean by vector is just like the amount of resource, time, staffing, energy, effort required to make a game. We're going to have to move towards more agility. And this isn't just in terms of like the development process itself, but like everything associated with game development in terms of approvals, pre-production, should MBAs be making decisions on what games should be made. People who are business savvy but really don't understand the products that they're overseeing. And so whether it's the structure, the decision making, the culture, I just think that we're seeing, as I mentioned when we talked about Ubisoft, the end of an era in terms of how things were operated and how things were done from a game development perspective. And I think that change, we're going to start to see newer models start to. I mean, there already are newer models emerging, and but I think it's going to become a little bit more obvious in 25. I once had a pretty long talk with Trip Hawkins, who talked on a number of different topics. But one thing that he mentioned is that he didn't believe that developers can reliably repeat making hit games. And so I do think that this is a situation in our industry where it's kind of like necessity is the mother of invention. I think that there's going to be better processes and better ways in which we approach things so that maybe you don't have 100% repeatability, but the repeatability of being able to create successful products should improve.
Yeah, and
Um,
one thing I'd call out that's like similar there, speaking of like small vector, is look at what Path of Exile 2 has done in terms of they've released a paid alpha effectively. It's not a complete game. It's buggy, they admit it, but it's doing very well because you're getting the core audience in to basically help you fix the game before it's ready to go, 0 to 60, right? And so I think there's a lot of things that we need to learn from various things about what's the proper way to go to market. I think the old way of just releasing this $500 million sunk cost game into the ether and hoping that you make your money back is just not the path forward anymore.
I would just say like just to guard that a little bit. And I've talked about this in the past with games like Once Human, which is from China as well, is that there's a lot of risk involved in those launches that are asking for player feedback, especially since we're talking about a rather consolidated market that has a lot of games that are highly performant, a lot of content, a lot of live ops calendars behind them. And it's like you really have to take advantage of that first 100,000, 200,000 players that are in your game, because if they just leave after giving you some feedback, you only get one shot at launching your game. And I hope to see that, well, depends if you want to see trying to be successful here or not, but I think that the more they push towards things that are polished, that have a lot of content, that aren't super buggy from the get-go, that would be a positive step for them. But I also I can see it both ways.
Well, I don't have an MBA.
Right.
I have a BBA. So JK, you can kick me out. You can kick my idea out there.
Yeah, and one actually kind of interesting specific example that I can mention is essentially like, so I used to work at FunPlus, worked on a game called King of Avalon, which did employ a monolithic game development model. And I think that to some degree worked because we actually were not making too many changes from existing games, existing 4X games, like Game of War, for example. And so we made very specific changes in terms of trying to make the game more accessible, improving UI, things like that. But like when I was at FunPlus, we had that model in for a time. FunPlus became the number one publisher in 4X with a lot of like, sort of reskins of King of Avalon, the game that I worked on. Now, one of the guys who I worked with when I was at FunPlus is a guy by the name of Shang Shen, who is currently the CTO of Century. Now, he had a company that actually was working on Roblox games. And so there came a point where Shang actually joined Century Games, having been a Roblox developer. And one of the interesting things that that I thought of was like I met Shang and talked to him about how they approach game development, and it was a much more agile, much more lean model. And when you look at the success of the games that Century has now, and Whiteout Survival is is one of the top 5, top 10 grossing games of 2024. They have made changes to their development process, and I think that I wouldn't ascribe all of their success to the development process and basically the learnings from having more of a Roblox based approach, but I do think that that was a factor.
Yeah, I
Yeah, and
think
they're one of the most successful Roblox developers. But back to my earlier point,
Yeah,
Lifetopia
Leftovia.
basically makes money from marketing activations. It has hundreds of thousands of average CCUs. I can check the latest numbers. It's super successful, but it doesn't monetize like a game, which is interesting.
Right. All right. Any other predictions?
I'll start another one. We've been tiptoeing around this for a while, but I think that 2025 is the beginnings of when the Activision power vacuum intensifies. And I would say, like, for as long as I've been covering gaming, Activision's sole purpose in the industry was to develop or acquire businesses with $1 billion of potential. And, across the space, I would say they generally had a pretty good track record of execution. So stated goals with Microsoft are much less clear, but certainly different. Microsoft's main incentive is to induce subscriptions, and that's almost exclusive. So with the product of like Call of Duty effectively lowering their ASP by virtue of a Game Pass, I think it's going to be harder for other publishers to push premium products in the same space. And moreover, Microsoft is still undergoing rapid studio rationalization and consolidation, and they're unlikely to be size acquirers if we're looking for like a resurgence of M&A. While I don't think this will happen in 2025, I do think we'll soon see a first year without a frontline Call of Duty title, and that would be the first time in over 20 years. So I think that would be another big change for the game industry. I mean, that title's been around for a long time and forever, but I just don't see it with the same kind of muscle involved as a portfolio company.
Yeah, I'm with you. If ever there was a time for EA to be cooking on Battlefield and giving Battlefield one last chance, this is it, right?
Yeah.
Or someone else to step in. But honestly, I don't think a new IP can fill the vacuum there for COD. It has to be an established franchise.
Yeah, and it just like the multiplayer component of Duty outside of Warzone is just like it's. I don't want to say it's tired, but it's really hard to imagine how that changes materially in the next 3 to 5 years. I mean, I'm looking at Call of Duty being played now on streams, and I hardly recognize it. It's still very fun, but I I still think they need to figure out a way for that a COD title to exist over a longer period of time versus a kind of like an EA Sports once a year event.
I'm going to sound like the old man yelling at clouds, but I feel like all the new physics and stuff they've done in the last 2 CODs and now with all the new motion, it feels like they made it very like super twitchy, like for Gen Z and Gen Alpha, who all like are just like, all over the place, and we're just the old men who don't have the reflexes anymore to compete with them, and that's just kind of, so I don't even play anymore.
Civ 7 will be out soon, Matt. You can argue.
All right, Matthew, what do you got?
What do I got? I mean, I can go a couple different ways here, but I'll start with this one because it kind of dovetails in terms of, people trying to fill that power vacuum. And I think the VC funded AAA startups will continue to struggle. And a lot of people are looking at a couple of games that come out right now because they're not from Activision, EA, or Take-Two, right? They're looking at Path of Exile 2, Marvel Rivals, and Delta Force that are off to very good starts in terms of their Steam releases. But we have to remember that those are backed respectively by Tencent, NetEase, and Disney, and Tencent, right? Though it's not like it's not like these are indie studios that are making breakout games with VC funding. These are studios that are backed by some of the biggest and best in the world. Although the Tencent studios do operate independently, this is not an unproven team and IP for either of those games as well. And so I just think that as I've probably said the term come to Jesus a few times already on this podcast, but I think there hasn't been a come to Jesus moment in the venture land, that a lot of these investments that were made in 21, 22, they have to mark them down and just start seeing the reality that if they want to exit these for anything and recoup any of their investment, they're going to have to mark them down and seize what's there, because the reality of the market is not going to live up. We talked about this in a Slack chat, right? That, for example, I joke about survival games, right? Everyone thinks that, Tarkov existed, so what if we casualize survival? And this is just one example that a lot of people went after in 21 and 22, right? Is let's make survival games that are more mass market. Well, it turns out, battle royale games have some of those elements, and that scratches the itch for the casual gamer. And so I feel like, the product market fit for a lot of these opportunities hasn't been vetted, and a lot of these games just will never see the light of day or will not live up to expectations.
Yeah, it seems like from a VC investment perspective that sometimes a lot of the money is being driven by themes. And so whether it was like crypto gaming or basically betting on X, Riot, Blizzard, sort of folks to start new game companies, and now that's like not starting to really materialize as successfully as people thought. And some of these newer things now I'm starting to see like a mini theme around India, and so a bunch of money starting to jump into India. But like it's like this money's looking for something, but there doesn't seem to be a theme. And I think the UGC theme also kind of fizzled out. So I would say, like, I do expect, to your point, I would probably expect that VC funding to reduce in the future. I don't know exactly when. Like, a lot of these funds are locked up for a while, but
yeah, and the problem is that they raise so much money. Like even recently, we're still seeing 9-figure funds being raised, right? Like they have to invest this money. Like, and where are they going to go? You can't just go buy public stocks.
I think for VCs especially, mobile was a different story, and that's now a decade-long story too. I keep going back to 10 years. Mobile was successful for VCs much because of why mobile was successful in general, right? You had hundreds of millions of users being accrued over the course of 3 to 5 years. You had very low costs to acquire customers in the early part of that growth curve. And so there was a lot of successful exits. I mean, even like Zynga or Supercell or et cetera, there's a lot of capital that had been increased by virtue of deals being done in mobile. And it's a space where you, at one point in time, you could develop a game for $25 million and launch with a $3 to $5 million budget and maintain a team and actually have pretty good ROI on being able to outstrip that and return funds to your investors. But I mean, for God's sakes, like don't get involved in the console and PC business. I mean, all those costs go up 5 to 6x, unless you want to talk about China again. But it's just not a space for venture investors. I mean, sometimes these games, like a Take-Two, like GTA, cost more than these funds can raise. So why do you want to play in that? It's just a recipe for disaster. And I think, like you said, we're not quite there yet. These investments need to be written down. Some of these funds probably don't belong. There's just too much competition there too, which also has weird deal dynamics, right? Like supply and demand on a few deals versus adequately funding hundreds. That's not happening. So yeah, it's a weird spot to be in.
Cool. All right. So I've got my next prediction is really around AI and what I'm just kind of calling like the first beginnings of an AI native game. And so I think clearly AI is going to have, well, here's how I would characterize it. So kind of like at the beginning, post chat GPT, so many people got so excited about AI. And so there was all this like people just kind of piling on about how big of an impact AI was going to have on gaming and game development. And then we're kind of, I would say, if we're looking at like technology hype cycle, probably in the trough of disillusionment, where like people have kind of tried some stuff. They're like, this AI stuff is not that big of a deal. And so now I think a lot of people are starting to check out in terms of like what they feel the impact of AI on game development is going to be. But I think the thing that people fundamentally are missing, at least those who are starting to give up on AI or discount it, is just the rate of improvement and growth. And Elon Musk, whatever you think of him, I feel is, generally right. I mean, his timing can often be too optimistic, but Elon has suggested that in 3 years, AI will be able to do almost anything a human can. And so if you believe that, then AI certainly will have a big impact on game development. And so kind of like the way that I'm thinking about this and getting to my prediction, I kind of like categorize the use of AI in game development in kind of three levels. First is just leveraging AI, meaning you're using AI to kind of help you on some tasks or improve the efficiency of how you do some of your work. So you might upload some CSVs and do some data analysis. You might like have external play tests and take all of the videos, transcribe them, throw them into like a Jupyter LM notebook, and then have it like do a lot of the analysis for you. You can use generative AI to create concept art, and then you can like paint over it or whatever. So it's kind of like helping you. That's what I call leveraging AI. The second level is, and I think this is something that we haven't quite seen yet, but I think we'll start to see next year, is integrating AI. And what that means is that having AI actually take over a pipeline. So whether it's an art pipeline or let's say even like a feature like Battle Pass, where you've rolled out so many battle passes that every single aspect of the battle pass could potentially be driven and optimized and executed through AI. So having AI take over a complete pipeline, art pipeline, or a live ops feature or something along those lines is what the second level that I'm calling integrating AI. And I think the third level that I'm hoping to see is where you're actually AI native, where, and here it's more about the product but what I mean is that where AI is actually core to a new kind of game that will be developed. And I think we'll start to see some indications of what that could potentially be next year or maybe even the year after. And one of the examples that I like to give is just Dungeons and Dragons, right? So what if the AI could be the dungeon master and you like have a complete kind of setup so that you can play Dungeons and Dragons with the AI as a dungeon master. Maybe even the other people that you're playing with could be AI as well. But then that would be an example of an AI native game. But the prediction is that there will be a greater impact of AI starting next year. I think we're going to see a complete pipeline takeover integrating AI next year. And then we're going to start to see some notion of an AI native game, I think next year, but potentially in 2026 as well.
Yeah, I would say I wholeheartedly agree with the first two thirds of that.
Okay.
Um, and it's like for people that don't know game developers or designers, they're very inquisitive and creative, and they love to leverage new tech. And I can't say that I know a single one that isn't using AI almost constantly in their workflow to speed things up or test theories or develop concept art or whatever else. So that's absolutely going to happen. Number two, thinking about the game development loop and live operations, absolutely going to happen. I guess the third part is like, for me, it requires discounting the creative quotient of developers that has made this industry really, really strong for the past 40 or 50 years. And integrating AI into a game that's like at its core would still require a lot of human companionship, so to speak. And I guess I just don't want to agree fully because I don't want to see it happen necessarily. But what I can say is that AI will develop a game at its core, I think, before any other industry finds a rock solid proof point for AI outside of chat, because that historically, this industry just excels on leveraging new tech to take it to higher highs. And so I do think that's going to happen. I'm not sure if I disagree with you at all. I just like, part of it's just kind of hard to speak of because I kind of don't want to see some of those things replaced.
Right. One thing I could mention, I recently recorded a podcast with the CEO of an AI games company. And one of the things that we talked about was the other thing that could happen that would be a crazy scenario would be if we actually do achieve AI super intelligence. Because then what does that mean? It means that not only can AI make the game, but the AI can actually potentially be the audience, the players, and give you feedback on whether the game will actually be successful or not. And imagine if you're able to spin up, billions of game development teams that make games, and also billions of players that can tell you whether the game is going to be successful or not. Then there is absolutely no way that humans can compete against a super intelligence game developers. Right?
So I guess the other question there is, we're still discounting the player side too, right? We already know it's a very competitive space. So how many games that are operating at a cadence like that on that kind of cost basis can the market sustain, right? Because I don't think spend's going to go up demonstrably over the next 3 to 5 years. It's
So
like it's an odd problem to think about.
I would just say, and those of you who know me know that I rarely agree with President Musk, but just in terms of like the path of AI, there's also kind of a social psychological element to it, Brian. I think that's kind of what you were alluding to with the number 3 that JK was describing. Like, will as a society, as an industry, will we allow AI to fully take the wheel? That's honestly more of a question I have than will the technology eventually get to the point where it could. And I don't know the answer to that. But what
There's
I will
also that.
say.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, but one thing what you guys were talking about reminded me of in 2021 on Into the Metaverse. I had an interview with Rev Liberadian from NVIDIA, who was at the time the head of the Omniverse, and this is before the AI bubble. This is still during the Metaverse bubble. But he talked exactly about what you're describing in the sense of, AI in a few years potentially will be able to, for example, you're in GTA Online. You're doing missions and running your businesses and whatever you're doing there. Well, AI can take the wheel and do it for you when you're not actively playing the game. And that's just one use case. So being able to rethink what game economies can look like when AI can manage games and economies for you is just really interesting to me. And I don't really know where to go with that, but I think that AI is going to make us rethink how we design games and how we excite users to want to actually come in as humans when AI can do so much for them.
I would think too that the other point worth mentioning is the vision that Joe is talking about. We have no idea how much that costs either, right? Because part of the thesis behind AI-driven development cycles is, are you going to tell me how much it costs?
The one
is that it should be cheaper, right? But if you're talking about billions
of cost curve, it's going down so fast.
Yeah.
Well, so the one thing
after an initial period of investment, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, on the cost curve and on the investment, right? Most of the AI profit boom is being accrued to hardware companies, NVIDIA and server makers right now, right? And maybe some networking. So my mental model for gaming kind of works like this. Opportunity 1, JK's right. And it's basically a race to zero on cost because AI can make every game for us. Option 2.
Well, I hope I'm wrong. I hope.
No. But
I can play for us too. Why are we even bothering? Let's just stop playing games.
I have 3 scenarios, and I think that's the least likely. Option 2 is AI doesn't reach super intelligence, but makes us extremely more efficient and brings down the game development costs significantly. Option three, AI doesn't do much for us. It actually ends up failing, and we've invested hundreds of billions, potentially trillions of dollars in mostly GPU infrastructure that cloud, hyperscalers need to rent out on the cheap just to fill the capacity. Either way, costs are going to go down for the industry.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Yep.
All right, next prediction. Who's got it?
Well, I kind of already talked about this one when I talked about the recession in terms of layoffs. So I think I'll actually just skip that one. I will go to something more optimistic and not be just the bear of the room the whole time. I think the IPO market's going to make a comeback for gaming in 2025. I think that the market is setting up. We're kind of in the late stage of a multi-year bull market at this point, right? Basically since late 2022, early 23, the start of the AI cycle, the market has been in a massive bull cycle. S&P is up 25% or so in 2024. So although a lot of that has been driven by large cap tech and AI, the end of the bull market is when you tend to see kind of catch up trade and laggards before you get to kind of the top of the market. And I think we're in 2025, we're getting close to something like that. And I'm not saying the market's going to sell off 50%, but I think there's going to be some sort of correction in 2025. I think the law of averages just kind of dictate that. But before we get there, I think the IPO market's going to open up. And I do think, we talked about Supercell hiring Gare as a CFO a while back. I don't think that's by accident. He's not going there just to manage payroll for a private company, right? He's there to be more strategic, whether that's M&A or an IPO and take them public. And so I'm curious what happens there. Epic is kind of always a question mark of what will they do. Riot as well. But I think that the IPO market's going to open up for some of these marquee names, and I'm curious, who kind of tests the waters.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that, but I think I was probably of the same mindset in 2023 heading in. And this kind of goes with one of my predictions too, so I'll just shift right into that. And it's about a narrative shift for gaming. I'm seeing almost daily like doomsday opinions along the lines of the death of multiplayer gaming, which has trickled into a much lower quantum of funding for non-publisher sources and even like publishers themselves, right? Bigger and better. And most of these opinions are derived from folks that are tangential to the industry and not in it. And I think they kind of lack the scars of prior cycles. So narrative changes typically develop for momentum behind large catalysts. And I think that starts next year with the unveiling of the Switch successor before March, and then the launch, hopefully, of GTA 6 in the fall. And, by and large, publishers have been quieter over the past 2 years for good reason, but I think that changes in 2025 with new releases and an uptick in deal making. So that's the kind of ECM late stage cycle I think you're talking about, when the momentum has switched, gaming is in the spotlight again, maybe AI starts to take shape like Joe was talking about, and then you have a really good opportunity for those companies like you just mentioned. Epic, holy crap, it's certainly time, right? And I think that some folks are of the opinion they were waiting to kind of anniversary these changes with Apple, and I think they've been anniversaried 6 times. Like, let's go.
Well, now they had the UEFN thing, which really hit them, right? That really hit their economics last year. So I think they've, entering the middle of next year, they're lapping that. Like, I think that's a story to tell.
When you're public, you're also always lapping stuff too. So it's just, and we saw with Roblox, we just talked about earlier too. It's like, yeah, you're going to price at a great price. You're going to get shellacked when the market rolls, like Matt called, and then you kind of build a base up from there. But, it's just, there's a lot of advantages to being a public company, and they certainly have the scale to do it. And frankly, I think public gaming is getting a little boring, and I'm just looking forward to that one quite a bit.
And then maybe if I can just add another prediction, because it dovetails with IPOs, is M&A environment. And, this isn't necessarily specific to gaming. This is just what I'm seeing from living in M&A now is I think the M&A environment's going to improve significantly in 25. JK, maybe you can layer in these charts that I threw in the document in the video for people to see. But we've been down for M&A 3 years in a row, but private equity has record dry powder basically, and I think we're set for a very strong M&A year. Will it hit the highs of 2021? That always depends on like large deals, and I don't think we're going to get both on the video game industry and just a macro as a whole. Like I don't think we're going to get those massive mega deals. Well, maybe we will under Trump. Who knows with deregulation? But I think overall, there's just with lower rates, deregulation from the Trump administration, clarity on taxes. Right, there was a risk that cap gains would go up, and that would kill M&A for business owners, right? And so I think overall there's going to be an uptick in M&A. So while we're talking about more companies potentially coming to market, there could be some, public companies that come out of the market because of that. I know Crest was talking about people can fly, potentially be kind of cleaning up their books to get ready to sell. The Polish developer, what did they made? Forget the name
CD
of the game.
Projekt, Witcher, CD
Uh,
Projekt.
no, no,
Oh,
People Can Fly is another Polish developer, but yeah.
sorry, I thought you were trying
Yeah,
to
no
bring up a
worries.
name.
No, but I am excited for Witcher 4 in 2077 or whenever they release it.
Matthew, I think you're right. Just when I was at Gamescom earlier this year, one of the things that became clear is that there was a shift previously over the last couple of years from new game development to live operated games. And one of the recurring themes was that some of the bigger studios were lacking a new game pipeline. And as we know, M&A is always, you need growth. These game companies need growth. And especially if we're seeing a lack of new game pipeline, that I would agree that there's if you're making a game and if it's decent at all, I think you're going to have a number of offers there, and so I fully expect M&A to pick up as well, just to help bridge that gap in their new game pipeline.
And it also
I can
dovetails with
certainly
the first thing. Sorry, I was going to say it also dovetails with the first thing I said about VC funding, right? If the VCs on some of these studios start to kind of have their come to Jesus moment on valuations, like that will also spur exits to strategics, to the large publishers as well, to fill the pipeline.
I can see a shift certainly happening in mobile already, and I think that's fine. I just I think I spend a lot of time in mobile M&A, and I don't care to spend more time there. Most of the stuff is just fairly small, and I don't really want to talk about that. But if I'm thinking about large scale M&A from a U.S. publisher perspective, so again, I don't think this changes much from Activision's stated strategy 5-6 years ago. It's like you need to add $1 billion of top line for these to be interesting, and that probably meshes now with how much EA and Take-Two make, right? It's like 6, 7, 8, 9 billion-ish. I don't know what the targets are there, right? And maybe it is startup environment. Maybe some of these games do get exit velocity and make 300 to 400 million in top line, and they become interesting. And I would love to see that happen, absolutely. I just think I don't really want to go back to the days of 2021 when the trades were mostly financial engineering on the mobile side, because I think we all saw how that ended up. But I would love to see some big deals making like the U.S. publishers much bigger.
Yeah. My next prediction is really around data, and I believe that in 2025 there's going to be an increasing focus on data being viewed as the new source of alpha. And for any game studio, you're deluged with tons of data. But it's really about how do we use and leverage that data that would lead some companies to key insights that could potentially mean success or failure. And as a specific anecdote, this is word on the street, but I believe this to be true, is that, we mentioned layoffs before. AppLovin did shut down a lot of their game studios, including Machine Zone, the makers of Game of War. And kind of like the word on the street was that there was interest in taking that game externally or to like spin it out or something. But what AppLovin doesn't have is hardcore game data, and they wanted to keep that data, and they didn't want other people to have it. And so when we look at, for example, just even like just look at web stores over the last year, which has just been taking off. And many people don't know, but there are some games now that are generating over 50% of their revenue off App Store and from the web store. And so what does it mean to increase revenue by 30 or 40% overall? And again, this can be the difference between being profitable or not. And so when it comes to that, when it comes to making decisions, like, there's a number of studios that have scaled up their creative UA teams to over 200 people. How do you know when and what to do with those people? I, I think it's going to become increasingly obvious, whether it's from a UA perspective or changes that you make to your games, or I would say certain decisions that were made on how you actually implement specific features in live ops to actually make the difference between growing a game or having it decline. This is all going to come from data insights And we are starting to see, at least in the Chinese companies that I speak with, a large number of data analytics teams that are being developed. That, I mean, part of it is looking at AI, but a lot of it is also looking at how do you optimize your organization and your game products.
Yeah, I think the DTC business you're talking about was one of the most bullish developments for mobile publishers we've had in the last 3 to 5 years. And it's just a huge opportunity. And I think any company that has a game with call it 50,000 DAO that isn't doing this is doing themselves a disservice. It's not easy, but it's the first time in the mobile gaming industry you're able to develop a relationship with your customers directly, and that speaks to the value of data and knowing who you're servicing.
The only caveat is so far it doesn't actually grow the top line. It's a margin boost, right?
Huge margin boost. Yeah.
Will it generate incremental top line growth?
Well, I mean,
and that's where the data question comes in. Will having more informed, first party data lead you to design games that monetize better and create more structural growth in the industry? Or is this just taking the money away from Apple and Google and putting it in your pocket?
The latter, yeah. I mean, from an accounting perspective,
no, from
it's
now
increasing.
it is. From now it is. I'm saying in the future, will having all of this data actually generate significant, above expectation growth of the industry, or is it just, hey, we're all more profitable now? I don't know.
Yeah, I actually think it will. And for example, there have been times where, working on certain games, like a really small, stupid feature can actually do things like double your D7 retention. And so it's like, it's just, you've got all this data, but then, how do you leverage it? Do you have a team that can actually get these insights from the data that you're collecting? What data should you be collecting? All that kind of stuff. And so I think there's going to be an increasing focus on that in 25, and the guys that get it right are going to make a significant impact on their business, in my opinion.
I would say like a highly performant mobile publisher in like let's call it 2015 to 2018 era had like 15% EBITDA margins. This could raise that bar to 30, right? If you can get a hold of your whales and keep them engaged in your ecosystem, show them the right deals and offers, know who they are, it's a big deal.
I think one thing that dovetails with that, and I was listening to Phil Black's podcast with the head of Timmy, and when he's talking about Delta Force and how they're thinking about cross-platform, and I'm a FIFA player, and I see it there with the companion app. They're like, yes, you can play Delta Force, will be able to play Delta Force on mobile, but they don't see like just playing the game as the primary use case of the mobile app. They want you to be doing things like, setting all your kits and all your loadouts and everything and customizing stuff while you're on the go. So that way when you get back home, you can just jump in and play on your PC or console. In FIFA with Ultimate Team, you can do SBCs, you can create your squads, open packs and stuff, and then you go play on console, right? And I think there's just an interesting dynamic there as well that kind of dovetails with that as well.
Do you guys have any other predictions?
I have a small one.
Okay.
I would say subscription impacts. I'm not a big fan of subscription impacts on gaming, kind of like the Game Pass model, but I do believe it's increasingly becoming hard to fight given the companies involved, the amount of capital they have, and then the stated goals of their gaming businesses. And this would be, Netflix, Apple, Microsoft. I would say startups are struggling for capital and may find developing for subscription services to be the easiest path. And I do think this will have a modest impact on game development, with developers solving for engagement first over unit sales or monetization. And I do think this is a potential successful vector for AI to work, given its way into development more into live operations loops. I think this is another one of those kind of slow bleed catalysts that is continuing to take shape.
But Brian, wouldn't this actually be a huge prediction if subscription takes off? Like, wouldn't this have a pretty major impact on the games industry?
I'm not saying that like the success of subscription impact businesses is going to inflect, but I think that increasingly game developers will need to utilize this as a potential vector to make their studios work financially.
I see.
So I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not saying these things are going to rip up the charts or anything like that.
No one is developing games that can be consumed in 20 hours anymore. Like those used to be kind of like the single A games you'd buy on Steam for $10, right? Or, console games that maybe were only $30, right? Those are perfect for subscriptions. And to your point, if the economics can work, if you can get the right cost structure and the right deal, we should be making those games for Game Pass.
For
not
Netflix
everything
especially,
needs to be not everything needs to be a live service. Like, give me a really good content that I can consume in a couple weeks. Awesome.
right? And not every IP needs to get jammed into a match 3 game to just it just doesn't make any sense. But they have a lot of IP that's story based already. I can see that working, and I can see it as a good vector for game studios. Like they want to work on a simple game, like not simple, but like a less menus driven game, let's say.
Yep. Well, I have one that dovetails there, and it's gaming adjacent, but I think it has second order impacts on gaming. Netflix making a much larger push into live sports in 2025. So we're recording on Christmas Eve. So Merry Christmas and Happy Hanukkah to everyone that's kicking off the next couple of days. But, we saw this with the Paul Tyson match. And as much as everyone ridiculed a YouTuber fighting a geriatric, at the end of the day, it had over 100 million people watching it, right? Like that speaks to just the sheer power of Netflix. That's like Super Bowl levels of viewership for a stupid boxing fight that's a joke. They have 2 football games tomorrow, NFL games tomorrow, and then Monday Night Raw is moving permanently to Netflix to WWE. I'm a WWE fan. Tell me it's fake. I don't care. It's fun to watch. It's great TV that I watch, right? And it's coming to Netflix starting on January 6th, and they're treating the Netflix kickoff like a PLE. The old pay-per-views are now called PLEs because they don't charge for them anymore. They're treating the Netflix first episode like a PLE. They're having the first in-season transfer window to let all the stars move to Raw from SmackDown to be on Netflix. Like Netflix is starting to stake its claim on live sports, and I think that's not going away. I think they're going to be very active in bidding for sports rights. They just bid for the Women's World Cup rights. I think I saw that. So I guess my questions that are related to gaming is, number one, do they deprioritize gaming investments to focus capital on securing sports rights? I mean, these sports deals can be multiple billions of dollars over many years. Or second, do they actually, become more active in looking at ways to tie their gaming portfolio to the sports rights they're acquiring? Do they get more, active in building WWE games that tie into what they're doing with bringing Raw? And do they, get more active in building football games and stuff like that? I don't really have an answer, but I think it's very interesting what they're doing with live sports. And we know that sports is a genre that works in games, and they'd be stupid not to tie those together.
That's really interesting. I think I wonder if those 2 units even talk to each other. My inclination is to always assume not, but who knows? The stuff they're doing in sports is amazing. I'm a huge Tyson fan. I certainly watched the fight. I also, like you, thought it was a joke. Similar characteristics around size of investment, but the team sizes that you have to keep on are much different. I don't like the way that gaming is taking shape at Netflix currently. I think I've been behind that for quite a while, but I do think that leveraging sports and moving in that direction would be smart. Who knows? I really don't know.
I keep seeing this Netflix GM of games ad pop up on my LinkedIn. Are they trying to switch strategies there, or
give me a dirty Dom game?
I feel like the sports is going so well for them that it could spur some thought around whether or not they want to continue the current path of games or completely change it up. And I still think that if they wanted to change it up in a valid gaming strategy, would be a large acquisition. And I mean large acquisition, like EA or Take-Two size.
Yeah. Well,
and that's that I would get behind.
As long as they're operating in the model of churn reduction and just giving people more stuff to do inside of the Netflix universe, like making, kind of these lifestyle games or stuff like that built around the sports they're bringing in, whether it be NFL, right? You did a Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift game. My God, how many people would play that just because it's Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce, right? Or you did something with the WWE stars, or you do it with, Mike Tyson. You do something with, I don't know, but like you could, even just building very simple mobile-like games around them that are just purely for engagement and churn reduction. Like there is some value in that, but I'm with you, Brian. Like they're not treating games like a revenue generator. They're treating it as this is a way to give more value to the bundle. And if they do shift their stance and start to say, hey, we want to monetize games directly and scale this, then yeah, I think an acquisition makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, it seems like it's the early beginnings of the Amazon Prime strategy, but I just don't. I play a ton of games. I would never think about canceling Netflix either way, right? But again, you can't really draw conclusions from your own experience. That's a really bad way to do things.
I said this when Embracer broke up, but I think the leftover piece of Embracer that's going to have like Middle Earth and all the IP, someone's going to gobble that up. There's too much value, Tomb Raiders in there, and a few like there's too much valuable IP there. Someone's going to buy that.
Yeah, maybe I could then end, if you guys don't have any other predictions, with just I would say one, layoffs will continue, and then new game dev picks back up. So on the layoff side, I think there was a pretty popular recent Wired magazine article that was shared pretty widely that suggested that 10,000 video game industry layoffs happened in 2023. And in 24, there were 14,600 layoffs, so a 40% increase. And so I do think, and you kind of talked about this a little bit, Matthew, but we will, I think, trend lower in terms of the layoffs in 25, but I think we're not quite at bottom yet. So there was like a popular mantra this past year about just survive to 25. I think it's going to be survive to 26, really, before we start trending back upwards. I believe in 26. And um, so I do think, like with a lot of these bigger layoffs, generally speaking, word does leak. I think I posted a bunch of times in our private Slack channel about some of the rumors. I'm not hearing too many big rumors, but certainly I think there's going to be a number of some studio closures that continue throughout 25. And I don't think I'm not aware of any major things coming up, but I do think that continues through 25, and hopefully we do pick back up in 26. We mentioned lack of new game pipeline for some of the bigger studios. I think new game development does pick back up starting next year, and then that will kind of then help offset some of the layoffs that are happening. So, I guess.
I would just say on layoffs, there's always a healthy amount of attrition in every industry. Like there's
Yep.
never going to be a world again where we're scrambling for talent like we were in 2020, 21, 22, right? Early 22. I used to cover networking, and Cisco literally every August, because their fiscal year ends in July, they have a GE model. They cut 10%. And I know that that's not like common in gaming because it's more like, I think, as I said, it goes back to more kind of when projects hit a point where we have to end them because they're no longer viable. Those teams either have to find new roles or they get cut. And that sucks for those people, but that's the nature of the beast, right? You're operating in an industry where you're taking risks and success is not guaranteed. And we shouldn't reward people for being unsuccessful. We can give them opportunities to be successful and support them, but when the reality has to hit, we have to make those tough decisions. And so I don't think we'll ever go to zero, but I think, yes, I think layoffs will trend down. As you said, I think the big cuts are done, but it is the end of the year. A lot of companies who end their fiscal year in the calendar year usually announce big layoffs after the end of the calendar year, after the fiscal year. And then a lot of the large publishers, EA, Take-Two, and the Europeans have March fiscal years. So remember last year we had big cuts in January, February, right before earnings. And then we had big cuts in April and May, right before fiscal year earnings. If we're going to have more big cuts, it's probably going to be around that.
One thing I think about is, like, there is a scenario in which it doesn't actually fully come back, right? So, and what I mean by that is, I think that one of the other kind of key takeaways from 24 was, and not so much from the gaming industry, but more here in Silicon Valley, was this notion of efficiency and the age of efficiency versus the age of excess. And I think the company that best characterized this, I mean, obviously you've got, like, Elon, that's been pushing efficiency very strongly. We saw the first indication of what's possible with his turnaround of Twitter, X, and then I would say Facebook. Like, Zuck has, like, I like I know people at Facebook who are pretty senior, where it used to be they had so much free time. Like, it was literally like very, very not not difficult to work at Facebook. And now these same people are working weekends, they're working past 10 p.m. So if so, a couple of things that could happen to the games industry. I'm not saying it will or will not, but there's a potential. Is if this notion of culturally, this notion of efficiency gets into the games industry, we may continue to see additional attrition as people figure out new efficiencies. And as I mentioned, in terms of the new game development model, what if that means you have to have a fundamentally more efficient operations? Then you're not going to need as much people. And in terms of the prediction we talked about with respect to AI, there was a pretty famous company called Klarna. Is that the customer support company where they're literally just like nuking jobs left and right? And they're finding better efficiency, better output. But here's the other thing too, is that it's not all negative, right? Because one of the things that the CEO of Klarna mentioned is that they're actually paying their existing people. So while they cut people, they're paying their existing people a lot more because those people are now becoming more efficient in terms of their activity. There's a higher margin to spread the additional margin that they get amongst their employees. So we'll see how this all plays out. But I would
No,
say the one
I think efficiency has been, the VC's worm tongue whispering in the ears of executives across technology, including gaming. And I think that has been a factor in the large scale layoffs. At least, I mean, number one, your stock price got rewarded when you announced layoffs. Number two, um, you know, if you're going to want to do that, you basically have a free pass to do it in this environment, right? Because everyone's doing it. You can just be like, oh, well, everyone's doing it, right? And so, but I do think the worst is past, even with everything you're saying, because I think the large cuts have, you can only cut out so much before, you take out a vital organ.
There was a lot behind the cuts that weren't just cut and dry, right? Like we also had this hyper casual boom that has since subsided. We had a lot of companies that got acquired that needed to be right sized by the new acquirer. And those are two very large factors already. And I guess like just the final thought is like gaming is a really tough place to spend a full career. For every person that you meet that has had 20, 25 years of gaming experience, I can find you 10 more that spent 3 to 5 years or whatever else. And it's not like they can't do gaming anymore, but they also have a lot of things that you learn in gaming that you can't learn anywhere else. And they take those to other successful businesses that might be messaging apps or consumer software or B2B software, dating apps, sure, anything. And I think that's also a natural progression of people that really know customer engagement and UI and monetization and moving that stuff around to other industries. A lot of history behind that. So I don't think it's always like this doom and gloom story. Like we have, 50,000 unemployed game developers or something like that. But regardless of that, I do want to see this turn around this year because we all have friends in the industry and we would like to see us at full employment, so to speak. But we've just had a lot of catalysts falling the other way for a few years now.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point you make, Brian, about the ability to leverage some of the lessons from learning from gaming into other industries. Recently somebody had posted on LinkedIn about like finance, and there's an app in India called Cred. They have done such an incredible job in terms of like integrating like gamification into a finance app. There's obviously Duolingo, Khan Academy.
Hood, yeah.
Robinhood. I mean, how
I
we
won't speak to
gamified
the
options trading. Like, I mean, we turned like literally derivatives trading into like meme YOLO games with Robinhood.
Yeah, I won't mention the companies, but in India, there were a couple of companies that were not from gaming that reached out to me to ask specifically about how do they integrate gamification into their products. And I'm talking about completely like different industries that are very far afield. And so
Because it's really
certainly,
effective at creating retention. I mean, it's
absolutely.
proven to work in anything. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, maybe to like wrap things up, should we talk about potential winners and losers from a public company's perspective for 2025? Do you guys have any thoughts on that?
I kind of already gave mine away, but I'm just gonna keep riding the Embracer train.
Is it
I
a winner?
I think it's a winner, and I think the reason that I'm picking it is because I think the reasons I think they're going to be successful in 25 are idiosyncratic with whatever the market does. I think that their continued restructuring, the spinoff of Asmodee, looks like it's going to happen relatively soon. They got the debt financing done. They're going to spin off the coffee stain business, which is kind of like the single A and some of the other mobile games. And they're going to be left with a business that I think is potentially an acquisition target. So I think there's a lot of, idiosyncratic reasons that you can look at it and say, profitability is improving. There's a lot of good stuff left. And they're coming off of like one of the worst, they're lapping one of their worst comps they could ever be lapping, easiest comps that they could ever be lapping as well in terms of like game releases. And so I think there's just like a lot of reasons that they can continue to execute. Obviously the stock doubling prices some of that in, but I do think that, just kind of sentiment vibes, if you will, are strong there.
I'm going to stick to my guns on my thesis over the past 3 or 4 months. Number one would be Nintendo, new platform and software accompanying that. Take-Two, GTA 6, further, I would say, continued success of Zynga, right? Like not outwardly successful, but solid grower in a good part of the portfolio. And the third, I would say Unity, just because self-help story, not demanding on valuation, a lot of ways to win.
I might disagree with you.
I figured you would on Unity.
Unity.
Yeah.
Now, just to be clear, like at our game studio, we use Unity. I would love to see nothing more than for Unity be as successful as possible. But I think from my perspective, just like I have been speaking to some engineers within Unity, and it just seems like the cultural change that I was hoping that Bromberg would bring does not seem to be there. So, I mean, I hope I'm wrong. Only a few data points that I've checked in on. So while I'm rooting for the best, I'm not so sure they're going to be a big winner next year. And then clearly, on the ad side of the business, I mean, AppLovin is just they're just destroying them. So
I'll throw one more name in. I don't think it's a full 2025
Ubisoft?
story. No, I think in the second half of 2025, the Witcher 4 hype for CD Projekt is going to start. That hype cycle is going to start. Potentially, if we're looking at a potential late 26, early 27 release for that game, now that it's in full production for the last few weeks. So that's kind of 2 to 3 years. So that kind of checks out.
Anything with any volume or market cap behind it?
Sorry. Then just go buy NVIDIA. Then just go buy more NVIDIA.
Just find a video.
No. But like, okay, I had another dad joke that I wanted to throw in to wrap up. The stock's been in a cyberfunk since Cyberpunk flopped. Yeah, that was bad. But no, I think that everyone's excited for Witcher 4, and so now that it's kind of in full production, they're going to start telling that story. And whether or not you believe it, like I think the stock, similar to like Take-Two with GTA, it goes through the cycles where you kind of just buy it on the hype regardless, and every time it sells off, you kind of just close your eyes and buy more until the game releases. And I feel like it can kind of be one of those scenarios.
The one thing about CD Projekt that I like relative to Take-Two is that they've actually moved their IP out of just the games world, and they've done it in a really good way. Fallout did the same thing, really good show behind it, and then Take-Two had that absolute stink fest with Borderlands. I was on a 18-hour flight basically over the past couple of weeks, and Borderlands was on the list of things to watch in the plane, and I just didn't even bother because I heard how bad it was. Like, just what are you doing?
Right. Yeah, I think for me, for winners, kind of the boring answer, I think is just Tencent. I think they just have so much scale, information advantage, all that kind of stuff. So I think they just continue to roll. And
I just don't know if it moves the stock. Like, quite frankly, like I think the stock, the stock,
probably not, but
yeah. I think from like a fundamentals, like gaming perspective, yes. But I think from like a stock price perspective, like, I think it's flows before hose, to quote Tracy Alloway with regards to Tencent.
The one winner I'm hoping to see is just some new AI game studio that like comes up with something brilliant. So that's like an unnamed, undiscovered winner as of yet, but I hope somebody does that. And I don't know, losers. I think I don't want to comment too much on that, but hopefully it's not Unity. Is what I'll say.
It's very binary, right? Like, and I think as someone that has to pick stocks professionally from time to time, you have to take those risk rewards into play. And some of the stuff you're saying is rather obvious, some of it isn't. But the thing trades pretty much like Zoom or another call it bottom of the barrel Okta kind of software name. So I think it's a little better than that, but it's up to Matt.
Well, let's put it
Improve
this
that
way.
culture.
No, if they can get something going right and get a sentiment shift, there's a lot of escape velocity that can occur with that, right?
Yeah. That's a pretty quick move from 14 to 27, and that can happen
Right.
again in force. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think with that, that's we pretty much have wrapped it up. Our 2024 recap, 2025 predictions. And so with that, maybe the one thing I would hope for in 2025 as well is like we do have a number of kind of hardcore fans that really like hearing from you guys. So maybe we can make this a little bit more regular in 25. But with that, I think that's it. And for our audience, we will catch you next time. Thanks, guys.